are listening to the Fantasy IPA podcast.
Can't wait. It's time to go eat, baby. Let's eat.
Your audio hangout for the latest intel, projections, and analytics.
Hey, we are playing to win. I'm in a league of my own. They ain't ready for me.
Visit us at fantasyipa.com and follow us on Twitter at fantasy_IPA.
This is a man's day.
Let's do this.
And welcome to another edition of the Fantasy IPA podcast. This is a special July 4th edition. Hope everyone has recovered from fireworks and libations and whatever else you do on them long weekends. I'm joined today by Jamie Black, my co-host. Jamie, how was your 4th? How are things going?
My 4th was good. Had fun, watched fireworks, drank beer.
So we've got a quick check-in this week. We're going to be talking about some news and notes, some trades as usual. And then we're going to hit on some dynasty startup tidbits, piggybacking off of our last episode where we performed a startup draft, the first 3 rounds. Well, we touched a little bit on some of the startup strategies within, but we're going to, revisit some of those, give a couple tidbits that can help you in those startups. So let's go ahead and jump into some news items. There's actually some pretty interesting ones that came across the wire this week. I'm going to start with Rashad Jennings. And just recently, Ralph Vacchiano out of the New York Daily News reported that Jennings is the likely workhorse. 15 to 18 carries comes from Giants.com. Now in New York, they did draft Paul Perkins in the 5th round. Shane Vereen is still hanging around in that passing role. I'm not even going to mention I'll mention him, Andre Williams, who I don't really necessarily factor into the conversation. But Jamie, what's your take on Rashad Jennings and the New York Giants?
Yeah, I don't think it's all that surprising. He finished the year last year in those last 4 games, which was really the only games they strung together where they were successful running the ball, were the only 4 games where Jennings had 15 or more carries, I believe. And he did have he had 14 or more carries in all those games. I think he averaged 19 or 20 carries over those last 4 games. And over that span, he was the number 5 fantasy running back in PPR systems. It's not surprising. Jennings, he's a good workhorse type back. He's one of those guys where when he gets the ball, he does tend to get better and he as the game goes on. And he's 31 years old, but remember he didn't touch the ball a lot at the beginning of his career. So he's 31 with not a lot of wear on the tires. So I think he's a guy that they could ride, and I think they would be better off. It's a lot like Green Bay's offense. They need to play off the run, and they need a running threat. Jennings is the running threat on that team. So, yeah, I'm buying into it, and I do think they're gonna ride him.
Yeah, and he's one of the latest projected starters that you can grab in later rounds. At 6'1", he can also pretty underrated in the passing game. He can catch passes, and I think ultimately with those weapons on the outside with Eli Manning there, I think you need just safety there. And when we're talking about rookies coming in, although they look promising, when you're talking about safety and you've got a veteran in Rashad Jennings, you can see them leaning on him heavily and bringing Perkins along slow. So I agree. We've already identified him, I think, in one of our earlier podcasts as a good late round target, especially if you're in win now mode or if you're going 0 RB as it pertains to redraft. Let's move on to one of our favorite teams to talk about, which is the Cleveland Browns. And this one revolves around that crazy wide receiver core that I've been referring to with all those heads to kind of sort out. But Tony Grossi pegs Andrew Hawkins and rookie Rashard Higgins as the Browns' likely number 2 and 3 receivers this year. What are your thoughts on Higgins and Hawkins?
I've been toting Rashard Higgins all year long, and I think this says just as much about Higgins as it does Hawkins. They drafted 3 receivers this year ahead of Higgins, and of course Coleman is going to be the guy there, but it looks like Higgins is going to jump the other 2. And, Andrew Hawkins, he's played in that offense before, so that's not surprising that he's gonna be the veteran presence, so to speak, there. But yeah, at the end of the day, for me, I think it says a lot about Rashard Higgins personally.
Yeah, it's still a situation that I'm trying to avoid. I think Higgins is the cheap option to own in Dynasty. I know that you've been a big fan of his. I'm not necessarily ruling out Ricardo Lewis over there, but hearing these blurbs kind of reinforces who you've been touting this offseason. So kudos to you. We'll see if it materializes, Jamie. All right, Jamie. So this is podcast, 15 now?
Yeah.
And you've been trying to sneak in defensive blurbs for 13 or 14 of the week. So I'm going to give you one here. And this one deals with our NFL or our Dallas Cowboys. And it talks about Rolando McClain's 10-game suspension for violating substance abuse policy. So I left it in here. What's your take on this situation?
It's just typical Dallas Cowboys defense, man. They're falling apart, and it's going to hurt the defense, especially at the beginning of the year with Demarcus Lawrence and Randy Gregory both serving 4-game suspensions. And, they were having issues with McClain before the suspension, but now he gets into a 10-game suspension. If there's any good news, it's that Skandrick's coming back, and he's probably one of the most underrated corners in the league. He's probably our best cornerback. That's the only good news. But hey, if you want to look at it from the offensive side of the ball, the Cowboys have a pretty easy strength of schedule, and the defense might give up a lot of points. So, Romo, Zeke, Des Bryant, they might have to be putting up some points to win. So look at it that way.
Yeah, that revolving door in the linebacker core of the Dallas Cowboys, whether it be for suspension or injury, continues. So we'll move on. The next news item, we generally don't talk about people that aren't registering on ADP. Actually, I don't think I've seen this person even drafted this year, whether it be NFL 10s or whatnot. But, this is the second time this offseason we've seen some blurbs about Desmond Lewis out of Buffalo, the Buffalo Bills. And Greg Roman said that the sophomore has made huge year 1 to year 2 strides. I think you mentioned that he was the MVP of OTAs earlier. So, what is your take on Desmond Lewis, Jamie?
You have to pay attention to someone who's 6'4", 215. Well, that was his weight at the combine. Sounds like he's been working out in the offseason. I'm not sure if he's gained any or not, but, they don't have that type of receiver there. You and I spoke about that. Sammy Watkins is the biggest receiver they have there, and he's barely 6'1". So, he could be a guy that comes out and starts, the number 3 receiver, and Watkins seems to be dinged up all the time. So you never know. He could be a guy that gets more snaps than we anticipate, and he's certainly a red zone target, a red zone threat being that big.
Yeah, I think he's actually somebody that could be rosterable. If you think about what one of their bigger receivers last year, when Chris Hogan did last year, he had some games where he was startable. There's question marks with Sammy Watkins in the foot. Robert Woods is what he is. But Desmond Lewis could come in as that big target and surprise. So, I think that people need to start considering him in maybe MFL 10s, late flyers, or in redraft. But I'll definitely be keeping an eye on Desmond Lewis as he proceeds. And, you mentioned that he is 6'4" at 214, 4.58, which is, it's a good speed for that size. Didn't necessarily kill many of the combine drills, but for someone for a receiver who's shown steady improvement and who keeps getting praise out there with a very volatile wide receiver core, I'm keeping an eye on Desmond Lewis.
Yeah, and his pro day 40 time was actually a 4.46. So he could have just had a slow combine. I think when you look at pro days, that they always run faster there, but it's probably somewhere in between. You don't always have your best day on the combine. So
yeah. Takeaway is he's fast for a 6'4", 214 pounder. All right, so let's move on to one of my favorites, Zach Zenner, and once again, two blurbs coming out within the past week and a half makes me perk my ears up. But one of them was around the Lions planning to give Zach Zenner a heavy preseason workload. Not sure what that says, but just recently, MLive's Justin Rogers thinks that Zach Zenner is the early front runner for the big back job, and I agree with him. So what's your take on Zach Zenner, Jamie?
I agree too. Definitely the early runner for the big back job. For whatever reason, Ridley has not been able to get back on the field. And I'm not sure if he's fully recovered from that 2014 ACL tear or not. That could be it. I really don't know, but I mean, it kept him out of the offseason program too. Some kind of undisclosed injury kept Ridley out of the offseason program is what I'm trying to say. So, it looks like, and Zenner, he's looked good. We saw him last year and he's had some flashes, so he's the type of guy that I think if he's given a chance, given the opportunity to be that big guy, that he probably does seize it. And, that's not something to sneeze at in Detroit, that, the big back role there, he could score some touchdowns and, he's going to get some touches. So.
Yeah, I think he tends to get overlooked considering Amir Abdullah and Theo Riddick are already, viable fantasy options in the mid rounds. And, I see Zach Zenner every once in a while, he'll go in the 20th round of MFL 10s. I personally think now is the time to grab him. And if he does see that heavy preseason workload, his value can only rise. And maybe even if you don't hold on to him, you may be able to flip him for more than what you paid for him. So personally, I hold on to him. I like Zach Zenner. And in a role where Joique Bell kind of exceeded expectations, I expect nothing but the same from Zach Zenner. All right, last news item we're going to talk about, and we're going to stick with the running back position. And this is with the Indianapolis Colts, where Jim Irsay said that undrafted rookie Josh Ferguson has a chance to be special. The blurbs that I was reading was around how they had him as early as a 4th round pick, and the fact that he fell out of the draft is pretty interesting. With Frank Gore, 33 years old, Ferguson had some pretty impressive numbers at the combine. So, what are your thoughts on Josh Ferguson with the Indianapolis Colts?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to think. They had him as rated as a 4th round running back, but yet he didn't get drafted. In college, he never was tote the rock sort of type running back. He was one of those guys that he caught a lot of passes. He probably carried the ball. I couldn't tell you exactly, but I would guess around 10, 11, 12 times a game, and he would finish the season with 4 or 5 catches a game, maybe a little bit less, but I know he had 2 years in a row where I think he caught 50 or more passes. So I see him overall down the road, maybe, contributing. I don't know how much he helps right off the bat, because I see him more as a 3rd down type, running back. And with that offensive line in Indianapolis, I don't know that you put a rookie in there on 3rd down to protect Andrew Luck. I have a hard time believing they're going to pull Gore out on 3rd down. I think he's going to maybe be someone who spells Gore when Gore gets tired. Not too much sure. Not sure if he does too much other than that this year, to be honest. But
all right, so that actually does it for our news and notes. We're going to jump into our feature section today and start talking about the tidbits and nuggets around startup. And last week we did a 3-round startup mock and touched on some of these, but now we're going to take these point by point and just kind of have an open conversation about dynasty startups and where you are on some of these, Jamie, and I'll chime in where it makes sense. But let's start with overall startup strategy. Do you have anything just kind of like overall, and then we'll get into some of the specific bullet points, but how do you go into, or how do you frame and get yourself ready for a startup draft?
Well, I mean, obviously, age consideration is one of the first things you look at. But with that said, you don't go crazy. I think a lot of people they get a little eager and excited about younger players, and they ignore the 27-year-old guys who are still in their prime for 4 or 5 years. So I think what I do overall is I try and look 3-4 years down the road. And I don't try and get too far ahead of myself. If you do that, you always want to try and win now. So I'll look 3 or 4 years down the road, and Brandon Marshall is a good example to use. For instance, he's probably going to finish as a top 10 PPR receiver this year in redrafts, but he's probably not going to be drafted in startup drafts until 5th, 6th round. I'm not sure where he's going, but and the reason is because 3 or 4 years down the road, he probably won't be playing in the NFL, or he won't be effective. Whereas someone like Julio Jones, who's 27 years old, or Antonio Brown, who's 28, you don't, I wouldn't ding someone like that who's still young enough to where 3 or 4 years down the road, they're still elite players.
Going back to the age consideration piece, I actually think that the emergence of these young wide receivers has, spiked the whole balance of going youth heavy in these drafts. And I think in startups, you can exploit that in the sense that you talked about these proven veterans that are, 26, 27, that are getting overpassed by people who haven't played a snap. So as far as age consideration, I think that there are two schools where there are some people that won't even go after older players, quote unquote older players, and then there are some that they target those, and they're good targets because they're very attainable and you can sustain a good roster. I like to be kind of somewhere in the middle with a good balance of age, young players and older players, but obviously that kind of depends on the way your startup goes, and then moving forward, kind of how your roster dynamics shift throughout the year. That's one of the beauties of Dynasty, is that you can have 4 or 5 different teams, all in different states, so to speak. Some you could be rebuilding, some you could be competing. But as far as age consideration, I think the biggest takeaway from me is that there's a little bit too high of a premium on the youth, and it can be exploited. So I guess just overall, what do you want to talk about as it pertains to positional balance, Jamie?
Well, generally the receivers, they do go early, and you see guys like Devonta Freeman falling into the 3rd round, and Lamar Miller and guys like that. And it does make sense early in the draft, with like Odell Beckham and Julio Jones, Hopkins, Cooper, Mike Evans. And right now, a lot of that is just the NFL, how the talent has shifted toward the wide receiver position. But as far as fantasy goes, it even kind of shifts more that way because they have a longer shelf life than running backs. Running backs, there's not very many Adrian Petersons out there who do it for more than 5 or 6 years. There just isn't, and you just don't know. So it's really, really hard after maybe 5 or 6 running backs to put a super high value on someone. So I try and get the receivers early, but at the same time, if a running back falls to me in the 3rd or 4th round, I'll definitely grab them. If someone like Gurley or Peterson when he was in his prime, someone like that, if you can get them, I think that gives you an advantage too. And then the another thing would be another position would be tight end. Like Gronk gives you a huge advantage in a draft like this, having him on your team for years.
Yeah, I think the fantasy landscape has shifted to kind of building that base with a strong receiving core. You mentioned the longer shelf life, but they're also less likely to be injured based on the fact that they're not getting the types of hit they take at the receiver position, and generally they're more in space. But I agree that the way the landscape is now, I want to grab those receivers, but I'm not afraid to get a back because if I can get 3 to 4 good years out of a back, that can be just as impactful as getting a receiver that's going to give you 6 good years based on position scarcity. So I agree that you can shift too far to the left or right on this, and that positional balance is pretty important as you're building your team out. All right, so let's move into trading pieces, and I'll ask the first question around trading this way, and because there are kind of two types, well, maybe not two types of owners, but there's two different types of strategies where you're looking to trade up and get really stud heavy, or looking to trade back, acquire value, maybe more people in the top 50, maybe not as many in the top 20. Do you have a take on whether you prefer to trade back, Jamie, or are you one of the guys that likes to go grab those studs early?
No, I think, if I have an opportunity to jump up and grab a stud without having to give up a whole lot, I will. But I think there's so many people that are, earlier we alluded to the rookie hype and how people, they'll give up so much to draft a player who's never taken an NFL snap. You can take advantage of that all day long. And, if it's coming up, somebody wants that rookie really bad, and maybe you trade back 2 or 3 spots, and the player that you were going to take is in a tier with 2 or 3 players. So you're not really losing out too much there. You're going to get the player in that tier you want anyway, but you could gain 7 or 8 spots, two rounds down the road. So I would say generally it's easier to do that, to trade back, to take advantage of those guys that jump up and they're trying to get the rookie or the player that hasn't taken a snap yet or hasn't been proven yet, but all that hype. But at the same time, if somebody slips, and I want them bad enough, I'm not scared to give up more than what market value would be to go after that guy if it's someone I think is going to make a difference on my team.
Yeah, I think you're right there, is that if you see someone slipping beyond where they should go, look to trade up. But for me, I'm a big move back type of guy. And there are times when you're in a draft and there's 3 people that you like the same, and you just can't find the proper value according to trade charts and so forth. But I'm okay moving back, even if it's to move up, 4 or 5 spots in the 7th round. I'll move from 212 to 215, even though the trade value chart doesn't necessarily sync up. You're still going to get someone you like, and then down the line, you might be able to grab someone who wouldn't have been there if it was there. So where do you stand as far as your willingness to move future draft picks, Jamie?
I don't want to give my future draft away. I don't think you ever really want to do that. But I don't put a ton of value on them either. So, I think we've talked about this plenty of times. A first round draft pick has a 50% hit rate. So keep that in mind. But at the same time, don't just toss in future draft picks every time you're trying to make a trade. Just to make sure you get the trade. You don't want to give it away like it's nothing. At the same time, just see it for what it is, and it is your future. If you can collect them, there are a lot of people that there's both sides. People who will give those picks away as if they literally mean nothing, and then people who collect them like they mean so much. They put so much value on them. I think you have to stay balanced there. Keep that in mind, and if you do that, you'll probably end up on the better end at the end of the day. Just keep in mind what those things are worth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Jamie, that I think I'm a little more on the draft pick heavy type. I love to acquire those future draft picks. Once you start getting into the 5th, 6th, 7th round, you may start, that's a large generality, but in startups that I've been in, that's when you start considering moving your picks or people start asking for that pick for future first rounders. And one thing that you know about those future first rounders is they're generally not going to depreciate. As the draft gets closer and people start falling in love with those shiny new toys, generally those draft picks are going to retain their value. And, it is a pick. So it is what the owner that you're proposing to, it is that player that they want. It gives you a wide range of value for a trade partner as opposed to if you have a single player. So I'm of the acquire as many draft picks as you want, protect your draft picks, but then, like you said, if there's a deal too good to pass up, go ahead and pull the trigger, because on the flip side, there is still that uncertainty of a first-round draft pick even hitting in the future, that 50% rate that we've alluded to. Anything else that you wanted to discuss as it pertains to startup draft tidbits?
No. I mean, we could talk about this for a couple hours, but I don't think so. I think we can cap it there and move on if you're ready.
Yeah, I think the only other thing I might add is we touched on it earlier this year, and whereas the rookies tend to be a little overvalued, I think there's a lot of sophomore receivers, and that pertains to wide receiver or tight end, that can be pretty good values in that, in today's instant gratification NFL fantasy landscape, if they haven't done anything in year one, people tend to give up on them, maybe even year two. But, there's plenty of examples that we've cited, like Jordy Nelson, who don't hit till year 4. So not everyone's going to come out and light the world on fire, a la Odell Beckham, or, Mike Evans had a pretty good rookie year. So I think just a slight counterbalance to that high rookie value might be targeting some young players that are still developing and that you liked as a rookie, but maybe haven't shown it, and then you can get it at a discount. All right, so that's going to do it for startup draft tidbits. Please feel free to tweet us with what your thoughts are, and if we're missing anything that's a tried and true strategy for you, let us know. Email us, hit us up on Twitter. But we're going to move into tops and bottoms, where this week we've got this one's more of kind of an open forum. We're going to talk about fantasy rules and really your favorite and least favorite rules in fantasy leagues. And, I didn't really confine it to Dynasty, IDP, or PPR. Just in general, what are some of your favorite and least favorite rules in fantasy leagues? As people are starting up leagues, this may help them kind of frame up their league rules. So, Jamie, let's start with you, and one or some of your favorite rules that you've seen implemented in your fantasy leagues.
Well, let's see, waivers, blind bidding waivers. Really like that. Much better than, well, there's many different ways you can do waivers, but I enjoyed the blind bidding. There's several ways you could do it, but I cannot stand first come, first serve. And I know you told me that actually recently too, that you can't stand that. Let's see,
Yeah, let me just chime in on that one real quick. So, yeah, when you're talking about blind bidding, I think that's one of the fairest ways to do it, in that, you're not rewarding teams for coming up. And when we're talking about reverse order of standings waivers, you're not necessarily rewarding those teams that had a bad draft or aren't doing as well. But it really levels the playing field throughout, and it almost rewards those people that were able to draft well and that they're on even footing as it pertains to grabbing those free agents. So for me, I tend to like the rules that level the playing field regardless of record. So for me, count me in as that as one of my tops too. And then you talked about least favorites, and even worse than reverse order of standings is the first come first serves, where there's a mad scramble to wake up at 8 a.m. to try to get your first come first serve players. That's just it's not very fair. It doesn't necessarily point to any kind of great fantasy strategy or whatnot. So Yeah, mark me down for endorsing those two as far as blind bidding as a favorite and a least favorite being first come, first serve. Any other favorites for you, Jamie?
Yeah, I like, and I know all of the leagues we're in do this, but a lot of them don't. Fractional scoring. Some leagues, some of the old school leagues, they just round it off. If you run for 99 yards, you get 9 points instead of 9.9. And leagues today, I think most of them have gone to fractional scoring, but they still not all of them have. I have a buddy that his family plays in a league, and I play with them every year. And theirs is that old school scoring. I mean, you have to hit 100 yards to get the 10th point. It's unreal. But and then I guess a least is for me is I don't get rewarding a point to running back for a carry. I've just never understood that. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I guess they're trying to balance the PPR thing or something, but it doesn't make much sense to me.
Yeah, point per carry leagues, and I don't know that it would be a least favorite of mine, but what it does is it just makes you reassess kind of the value structure. And before PPR was a thing, PPR was implemented to balance out leagues. So I'm not necessarily going to close the door on point per carry. I know the Scott Fish Bowl, I think they award 0.25 points per carry. And somebody put out a grid that showed how that really evened up the landscape. So, but yeah, let me jump in and throw out one of my favorite. And these rules, you lump them together with favorite and least favorite. And the one I'll throw out there is open roster construction, and the antithesis of that being the structured rosters. And what I mean by that is leagues that limit you, where you can only carry 4 running backs and 5 receivers and 2 quarterbacks, and you have to carry that many. Whereas in a open roster construction, I definitely prefer that in that it really rewards those fantasy players, and it doesn't artificially inject balance into the league like the structured rosters do. So, any other favorites or least favorites, Jamie?
No, I think we've hit them. And yeah, I like what you said about the open roster and structured roster format. I think when the open format, it rewards those who are more prepared and go deeper. And then when it's structured, it kind of handcuffs you a bit. So,
yeah. The last one I'll throw out there that's coming on for me and that I've gotten into is the 2 QB leagues, where you can start a second QB or a super flex. In that, I really do think that one thing I don't like is positions that don't have any value in today's NFL. I'm tending to look for more 2 QB leagues because I know that the QB is so valuable in the NFL, and that in order to get that same type of simulation in fantasy, a lot of leagues are going to the 2 QB. So I do have a balance of 2 QB and start 1 QB leagues, but I'm starting to really enjoy the 2 QB leagues, and that it adds another layer of value and another bigger player pool that you can actually that actually has value and that you can leverage in trading situations and in starting situations. Well, let's move on to questions and trades. We'll start with this one around Chris Hogan. And the question is, should I trade Chris Hogan for a 2017 third-round pick? This comes from Coach Doomba at Doomba_train. So, Jamie, would you trade Chris Hogan for a 2017 third-round pick?
No, I wouldn't. A third-round pick especially. I know we haven't seen – or a lot of us haven't seen a lot from Hogan yet, but I saw enough from him last year to think that he can succeed. And then New England obviously saw enough, to offer him that contract, take him out of Buffalo. So, no, I'm hanging on to Hogan here.
Yeah, I agree. And Twitter agreed at 65% over the third round pick. And, in general, I don't necessarily put a lot of stock in those third round picks. When you're talking about a 50% hit rate in the first round, 30% or lower in the second round, that third round pick, the chances of you hitting, there are definitely outliers, but for anything of value, I generally hang on to the player over a third round pick. So moving on to the second question here. This comes from FFF Adawan, and he's talking about a 12-team Dynasty PPR and who you would rather own. The three choices here are Mark Ingram, Jeremy Maclin, and Emmanuel Sanders. Which one of those three players would you like to own, Jamie?
Pretty balanced choices, I would say. I think I would lean Mark Ingram, though. I like Maclin. I really do. I like Sanders. I don't think either of them are wide receiver ones in 12-team leagues right now, and Ingram is a running back one. So, and I guess, I know wide receivers, their age doesn't mean quite as much, but I believe Ingram's younger than the other two as well. So I'm taking Ingram, I think.
Yeah, I'd love to see like a full year of production out of Ingram. And I know this goes against kind of the value and where they're going in drafts, but give me Jeremy Maclin here, who, at 28, I think he's got a good 3 to 5 years still left in him. As of now, he's still that number one option in that Kansas City offense. Finished as, I think, the wide receiver 14 last year, so he flirts with low-end wide receiver 1, but definitely a high to mid-range wide receiver 2. I'll take that in the next 3 to 5 years, and hopefully Maclin will be able to sustain. As far as talent goes, I think maybe Sanders might be the most talented of this group, but his situation is very murky, getting up there in age, and we've already chronicled the questions around the Denver offense and who's going to be under center out there. So give me Jeremy Maclin. And Twitter actually agreed with you, Jamie, at 46%. Maclin came in pretty close at 39%, and Sanders at 15%. In a 10-team standard scoring league, this owner has Gronk, Ezekiel Elliott, Thomas Rawls, Jay Stu, and Ajayi. What he's asking is, should he give Jordan Reed and Matt Jones to get Kevin White and a 17 second? What's your take on this one?
I mean, can you flex a tight end? I don't think so. I wouldn't give Jordan Reed up and Matt Jones. We haven't seen Kevin White play yet, and then a 17-round second, we just alluded to that as being like a 30-something% hit rate. So, no, I'm not giving away Jordan Reed.
Yeah, while Kevin White, I think he has the ability to – he has his range of outcomes is in the elite status. Right now, Jordan Reed, when healthy, is elite. And in a 10-team league, you definitely want to go after those elite players. Now, we're actually on the other end of what Twitter said, who would go 62% said they would take Kevin White and the 17-second rounder. I do like Kevin White, love his athleticism, love how he tore up the combine, loved his senior year, but it was 1 year over there, and he's been injured, so I'm going to agree with you here, Jamie, and I'm going to take Jordan Reed, who right now I know is elite. And if you're looking to move him, I would probably shoot for someone who's more established that might be in that range. So give me Jordan Reed and Matt Jones as well. All right, let's move into some more trade questions here. This is a 16-team Dynasty League at a half-point PPR. And the question is Todd Gurley or AJ Green and Matt Forte. Who do you take, Jamie?
I love AJ Green. I really do. Half point PPR. I think I'm going to say Gurley. It's a 16-team league. I don't think AJ Green's easy to obtain, but you're definitely not going to. How hard is it going to be to get a Gurley in a 16-team Dynasty league?
Yeah, I think that's the point where I was going to go to. Now, I think I'm still going to take AJ Green because I think I think as far as their shelf life, I'd probably put him similarly. I just feel a little bit safer with AJ Green, and I'm more risk averse, I guess, so to speak. But in a 16-team league, when you're talking about position scarcity and that delta within a position, it's definitely magnified. So I can definitely see going Gurley here. And, Twitter agreed with you there, Jamie, at 53% and 47% for the AJ Green side.
Yeah, that should be 49 and 51%.
Yeah, I agree. That's a really tough decision there. But let's move on to the next one. And this is a 12-team dynasty PPR. Would you take Zeke and AJ Green, the aforementioned, or Julio, Jordy, Adrian Peterson, and 203? Which side do you have here?
Oh, I'm taking the second side. Julio Jones, Jordy Nelson, Adrian Peterson, and a 203. I really do like Zeke. He still hasn't played a snap. Julio Jones he's elite. Jordy Nelson, I'm very confident that he'll return to his status for at least a few more years. And hey, Peterson, man, this guy's a freak of nature. He could play at an elite level for two more years or 3 more years.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that. I think you laid it out perfectly there. I take Julio, Jordy, AP, and the 203. Twitter agreed with us at 60%. This one is kind of a rookie special, and this is in a 12-team PPR. Would you rather have Pharaoh Cooper of the LA Rams or Braxton Miller of the Houston Texans? Which side for you, Jamie?
Man, I would take Pharaoh Cooper, and simply because it's a PPR league, and I actually think that he could be the PPR receiver in LA. Maybe not right away, but a couple of years down the road, if they have a young quarterback and a young offense, really. So Braxton Miller, he has the upside for sure, but he's playing in Houston where they already have a stud receiver and they drafted a first rounder as well. So
yeah, I'm going to go on the other side, and I've already talked about how I prefer Michael Thomas over there in LA to Pharaoh Cooper, but when you're talking about these types of picks, which are late second, early third, I'm tending to shoot for the sky, and I think of the two, I think Braxton Miller has a higher ceiling, despite the fact that is probably a little more crowded over there and a murkier path to playing time. But I like the athleticism that I see in Braxton Miller and the upside. So like I said, when we're talking about later picks, I tend to shoot for the stars as opposed to someone who I see, in my opinion, is capped in Pharaoh Cooper. So, and Twitter did agree with me at 52% for Braxton Miller and 48% for Pharaoh Cooper. So, last one we'll go through. This is a 12-team dynasty half point PPR. And the two players here are Michael Floyd and Jeremy Hill. Which side do you take, Jamie?
Last year on this date, I'm probably taking Jeremy Hill, but right now I'm taking Michael Floyd.
Yeah, I agree there. And, Michael Floyd's one of those guys that kind of fluctuates in value. I still think he might be a little bit undervalued. And part of it's because a lot of people expected him to kind of take over that receiving role over there. He is in a contract year, I believe, so he could end up with another team next year. But, give me Michael Floyd as well. Has anyone fallen more in value than Jeremy Hill over the past year? I don't know about that. They just signed Gio Bernard to, I believe it was a 3-year deal. So, talking about having a backfield to yourself, I don't see that anytime in the near future for Jeremy Hill. So give me Michael Floyd, give me the receiver with a lot of upside and a Bruce Arians offense. And if, he moves on, he could see a spike as well. So, and by the way, Twitter did agree at 74% for Michael Floyd. So, Michael Floyd over Jeremy Hill seems to be the consensus. All right, so that's going to do it for trade talk and questions. Jamie, thanks again for joining. Another really good episode. Any parting thoughts for the listeners?
Just again, we say it every week. Just keep hitting us up on Twitter. If you have any questions, anything you want us to answer, anything you want us to talk about, We are a fairly new podcast, and we can probably squeeze in anything you can throw at us. So follow me at FIPA_Black. That's FIPA_BLACK. And another good episode, Art. Happy to be.
Yeah, the last takeaway I'm going to give is, as it pertains to those dynasty startups, while we gave you some tidbits and such, one thing I forgot to mention is make sure you're leveraging your strengths. If you feel like you're good at identifying those young emerging talents, maybe you need to go youth heavy. If you feel like you're good at trading and churning, roster churning, maybe it's the older players to target for you. But get out there, try to understand what your strengths are. There's not a one size fits all. There are many ways to skin a cat, and today we were just supplying some nuggets that we've picked up over the years. But leverage your strengths and then get out there and understand some of those different strategies and try them out and see what works best for you. Other than that, that's going to wrap it up for another edition of the Fantasy IPA podcast. Please visit us at www.fantasyipa.com. Follow us at fantasy_IPA. And until next time, make sure you get you some IPA.
Adios.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy IPA podcast. Visit us at fantasyipa.com and follow us on Twitter at fantasy_IPA.
Hail to the king, baby. To the house, baby.
Please subscribe and review at iTunes, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast provider.
Go truck. Let's go truck.
See you next time, and until then, make sure you get you some IPA.
Come get some. Get some. Get some. Get some. I just want to say thank you for all the love.
And we're out.